Cool. Thank you all for joining me. So I'm conscious there's 2 more between us and happy hour, so let's try and make these final couple worthwhile. So just to set the scene for the start of the talk, I'd like you all to cast your minds back a couple of years to the sunny summer of July 2020. Now, if you're anything like me, you'll remember it as the time when we finally could get a haircut properly again in hairdressers, and we can walk again into pubs, which was a real treat. But little did you guys know that in a small town in the Midlands, I was sat there way out of my depth. I was currently halfway through a big house renovation, and my wife, who you can see up on screen here, was also heavily pregnant with our first child. They are 2 things that you should never, ever do together. Just bear that in mind. Equally, I then took the biggest job of my life as the head of digital at Nivea. Suffice to say, my stress levels were through the roof. But luckily, the job that I did take, our e-commerce business was currently booming. So if you remember, everyone moved online during COVID. Nivea was no exception. People bought a huge amount more in e-commerce. So taking the job of head of digital, everything's rosy, right? And with traditional FMCG businesses, generally we sell through these guys. So we sell products to them, they sell products to the customers. It's a win-win. Now, the issue with that is that the data that sits in the middle of all of that generally is owned by all of these guys. And that's not necessarily a problem, but it's a problem in my area. Because if you think of all of the data and the media that we need to optimize, I essentially lose sight of all of that once we optimize towards the retailers. So this is essentially what it looks like, right? We're shooting blind a huge amount of the time, and it isn't really good enough when a huge amount of our data and our media is now in digital. So we've made some pretty bold moves to try and address that, the first of which is moving more towards a big CRM program, so trying to scale up our loyalty, and also some of the skincare benefits that you can get through the website. Plus also we moved to D2C last year, so we started selling products directly to customers as a real way to try and address this change. But I wasn't really satisfied with that. I thought that we could move faster. And that's when I came across this awesome book. And for those of you who have not read it before, essentially it changed a lot of the ways that I approach work, and it essentially explains how a lot of Silicon Valley companies use experimentation and use experimentation process to drive breakout growth. And I think this chart probably shows it best in a nutshell. And this shows when Facebook's growth team was originally started, back in 2008, and you can see the trajectory the business was on at the current time. When their growth team was installed, they are credited with essentially driving growth a huge amount through the business. And they do that through driving hundreds of thousands of experiments every single year. Now, many of the businesses that you see up here, and many of the fastest growing businesses in Silicon Valley also do this, right? They run hundreds of thousands of experiments per year. And what kind of got me excited was how do we try and instill some of these principles into a brand like Nivea that is 130 years old, traditional FMCG, something that you wouldn't typically associate or put on a page with any of these guys. So I had all of that in mind, and I, armed with all of this new data, I rang up our head of development in Germany, a really lovely guy called Henrik, and I said to him, look, I know how all the best companies do it. All you need to do is give me the power to run 3 tests a week. I won't try and imitate his German accent because it will be terrible, but essentially he turned around and said, absolutely not. He said, Adam, look, we run 150 websites globally. You're mad if you think that we're going to be able to let you run 3 experiments a week. What happens if we try and run that everywhere? Things go a bit mental. So what about 3 tests a year? Little bit tricky. But I was convinced we had the right talent. I was convinced that we had the right attitude. What we didn't have at that time was the right tech stack. And this, for anyone who's done any experimentation, but for anyone in the room who's kind of starting out on this journey, that's essential to get a good base layer in terms of what you're first building. So for things like A/B testing software, we use a tool called Bunchbox. Hotjar we use for session recording, which many of you will probably be used to. And then things like Jira we use in terms of documenting and being able to show our process. But as I've gone on and we've kind of looked into this further, I've realized that there are a number of other building blocks that kind of exist when you look at experimentation. You need things like good creative to test. You need a good data infrastructure because you need to know that what you're testing is actually something that is actually meaningful. And you also need a really solid process. And I would probably say the final one of this, and the topic I'm going to talk to you guys on today and how we do it, is the most important, and it will exist differently in every business, but having a solid process and having something to build from is definitely the starting point. And thankfully, we did, and we looked at it at the right time, because although we had phenomenal e-commerce growth, what actually that was hiding behind that was some flatlining, so some pretty dodgy numbers. So the chart that you can see here is our loyalty club members. So that's our CRM people on the CRM program, which had essentially been flatlining for a couple of years before I took the job. And that's essential for our first-party data, right? We need someone to be able to opt in, and we need that consent. And having flatline growth for 4 months, we started the growth team, and we drove double-digit growth through rapid experimentation over the time. And what I'll talk you through today is the process for how we did it. And I'd love to stand here today and give you a how-to book and be able to kind of tell you this is the magic formula for doing it. I'm sure I'd be a millionaire walking out of here at the time. But unfortunately, silver bullets don't really exist. One of the main things that we've learned is that there's a reason Facebook make 100,000 changes a year, and that's purely because you have to iterate and experiment all the time. And I think one of my favorite quotes that summarizes this is from Anita Roddick. So she says, if you think you're too small to have an impact, try going to bed with a mosquito in the room. And I think that probably summarizes actually quite a lot of the disruptive talks that you guys will have all seen today, and obviously the whole kind of theme of the conference, because I think it's really easy to look at the speakers and to look at the work and to honestly say that that's an overnight success, or I could never be able to achieve that. But actually, it's the hundreds of little experiments and the hundreds of little wins that you have behind that make up the biggest amount of difference. And I'm a pretty simple man, so I like to have simple equations to define things. This is one that I really like in terms of the power of experimentation. So if you think of the number of experiments that are run within a business, the success rate of those experiments, and the impact that those experiments have, all of those have an impact on revenue growth, but they are all multipliers of each other. So if you can increase your success rate to X, and you're running the same amount of experiments, you're going to, by nature, improve your revenue growth as well at the same time. But you need a starting point, and we focus on 2 main channels, which I'll talk you through now. We focus on our website and D2C, and we focus on social, purely because both of them are well established, they've got good processes for testing it, and it also allows us to iterate fairly quickly because we've got the teams to be able to do that. So what does the process look like? It starts with, at first, identifying a problem or an opportunity area. So for something like the website, it would be something like increasing an add to basket. So you see an issue where someone lands on a page but doesn't convert. That is a problem that we'd like to go and solve. We then look at understanding the user. So we look at session recordings, we look at surveys, interviews with them. We then brainstorm. So we look at all the different kind of collective ideas around that. We rank those ideas, we design experiments to be able to test them, we implement them, and then we analyze and learn on that. And essentially, that acts as an iterative process, that final bit. So we work in 4-week sprints. We'll do that round and round again for 4 weeks until we've either solved the problem or until we've kind of time elapsed. And for social, if it clicks on, there you go. If for social, we operate in essentially the same way, but we just work with shorter sprints. So the main difference with social, as you'll know, you can put paid media behind it, and obviously you can increase the number of views within that, and therefore you can generally get the data back quicker. We also work with an amazing agency, Automated Creative, to help us with the process. So I think one of the things that I've learned as I've gone along with this is if you can't build the team in-house, then definitely look for agency partners who are able to do it, and there's certainly some amazing partners out there who can do that. Automated Creative are one of those. They help us with this whole process, and I'll talk you through a little bit about what they help do for us. But I think what we see is opportunities are everywhere, and it's really difficult to not get overwhelmed when you first start doing this. This that you can see on the chart, and I'm not expecting you to be able to read it, but essentially it's a journey that we mapped out with one of our search agencies to look at a skincare customer journey experience and the different touch points that happen along that journey. And consumer journeys are getting more and more complicated, right? People can jump from A to Z within an instant. So what we have to try and do is really focus on specific areas that might have the most amount of impact. So get those little wins first. 2 areas that we focused on for Q1, add to basket rate, so when someone lands on our D2C site, do they convert? And for social media, looking at how do we drive a better quality visit through to our website. And as I said, all of that starts with a brainstorm. So we try and get everyone in a room, and we try and essentially throw loads of ideas against the wall. For D2C, that might be looking at competitors, it might be doing survey analysis, it might be consumer relations, but essentially we try and get all of the ideas up there. And then we put all of those into a testing board. The reason I like something visual like this is so that then anyone outside of the team can also come in, they can jump into the tests, and they can try and have a look themselves about what's going on. And essentially, we map all of the cards along the left-hand side, as you can see here, and then as tests become more promising and we vote on them each week, we then move them along the board until past that, basically behind that bear there, you can see you put them live, basically. And what a card actually looks like is this. So this is one that that I'll explain to you in a second, but essentially it documents the background, so where we got the idea for the test from, the idea itself, the hypothesis, so what we're hoping to prove with the experiment, how we're going to measure it, and then essentially this acts as a live card. So everyone who's working on the project will go in there and we'll update it with things like results, imagery, everything as it moves along the board. So we know at the end of it exactly what happened, who it happened to, and everything along the test. And this one, as an example, got turned into this test. So the one that you can see on the left-hand side here was the original version of it. We said, what about if we move on mobile the add to cart button from below the fold, so you didn't have to scroll down to see it, to above the fold, where you can see it there on the right-hand side, the big orange button. And that had a 300% increase in the add to basket rate almost overnight. We concluded that, we rolled that out across the rest of the site. Now, I'd love to be able to stand here and tell you that all of our tests turn out like that. Obviously, they don't, and I think we fail generally on about 80% of tests. But the point is that all of this acts as a live card, and we're able to see exactly where and what's happening along the flow for it. Now, for social, we work slightly differently, and this is essentially a version of our data map that we create alongside our agency, Automated Creative. Now, on a website, you can probably only operate 4 or 5 different variants at any one time. For social, you can operate hundreds if you really wanted to. But in order to be able to do that, you really need a testing process and a testing map that enables you to properly screen that. So this is one that we created for the cost per quality visit. It includes what we want to test, where we want to send people, the messaging triggers, visual triggers, language styles, everything that we basically want to get out of a test. And the magic then happens with the guys at Automated Creative, then take that and essentially roll that into our creatives to go and test. So in Q1 this year, we ran all of these different variants to enable us to try and figure out exactly what it was about the ads that drove the lowest cost per quality visit to the site. And the magic that kind of happens behind the scenes is they tag up all of the individual assets with a combination of AI from different tools, so they can see, when we put that into a dashboard, we can see not just what's working, but equally why it's working. So any one social ad, we can see exactly what and how is working. And I think they put it really nicely about turning impressions into intelligence. And I think that, for me, and if you're kind of taking one kind of thing away from this, is how do you try and get more intelligence from the things that you're going to test. And what we then turn that into is essentially a DNA of a top performer, which we'll then put out for everyone else to look at. So you can see the kind of winning creatives along the left-hand side here. Plus, we're also able to see exactly what about it was driving that. So, for instance, showing a real person, not a studio-edited image, showing a real person holding the product, being personal in the copy, or using static if you're trying to drive traffic versus video. So all of these then essentially act as a knowledge bank for us to then take into the next test. So we're able to kind of iterate and move as we go. And then I'm super proud of the results and the team for generating this. So just in terms of the kind of metrics that we set out to prove, so our add to basket rate, we made a 4x improvement on that in Q1, and a 60% lower cost than our cost per quality visit, purely through this whole process of iteration and experimentation. Now, both of those have huge impacts for the business. They have huge impacts for what we do long term, and have millions, potentially millions of pounds of revenue generated. But equally, there's a huge knowledge bank there for us to kind of build and go on. And the macro effect of that is that actually our retailers benefit at the same time. So I'm trying to do this as a win-win game. We get the data back from our consumers, but then we can use that to better influence what we do on Amazon or Tesco or Boots. So all of our launch plans get better every single time with the more that we're able to learn. So in summary, I'd like to leave you, let me move out of the way. In summary, I'd like to leave you with kind of my 5 principles that I've learned for experimentation. The first one is start small. I think, as I said, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with just how much content is in there, or look at this as a finished picture and try and say, I'd never be able to do that. But actually, I think we've proved that out as we've gone, we've built on it, and we've now got to the kind of impact and the formula that we've got at the moment. I would also say focus on one area, easy to get lost in big consumer journeys. Try and make sure that you've got one area and maximize impact against that. Empower your team and train them, or get a great agency. And as I said, I'm fully aware that we're never going to in-source everything, so you need to have those great agency partners to help you build on that. Equally, you need to be able to empower your team. So if we're making a decision on what copy or creative or different changes are going to be made, the team need to be able to make that in the moment. They can't then wait a week and go through levels of sign-off to be able to do that. And that does take trust. It takes stuff to build over time, but I would definitely look at trying to get empowerment for the team around that. Equally, encourage ideas. You need a kind of consistent flow of ideas to make that work. We've also found that getting people from outside of the team into it to come and help with that idea generation tends to foster some more creative thinking. And then finally, last but not least, is have a clear process, but review it frequently. And as I said, I've kind of shown our process here today. Steal that with pride, right? But use that as a point to build on and go after that. But make sure you're reviewing it frequently for your business and the cycle plans that you have and the kind of setup that you've got. And I think my message to all of you guys is that, if a 130-year-old brand can take what are essentially Silicon Valley principles and have the type of growth impact that we've kind of shown with some of the numbers today, then I'd say whether you're a mass brand or a startup, you can equally do the same. And I think my goal over the last 18 months was really to prove that out. And yeah, I think my kind of parting message to you is try and do the same. And please reach out to me on LinkedIn if you've got any questions, you want me to send you anything from today, then please shout. And thank you very much.
Absolutely superb presentation. I love the way you talk about the fact that people can look at these conference stages and then think things are too big. Why should they even try? Facebook can do that, or Dove can do that. So I love that. But let's talk a bit about the process. I know you talk about Automated Creative, an amazing agency owned by another friend of mine, Tom Oliverson. But then you also talk about building your tech stack internally and building your team and training your team. So where do you stand on the in-housing conundrum in terms of should brands be taking everything in-house, and how does that affect their work with agencies and great creative agencies like Automated Creative?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't think I think my perspective on it doesn't serve a purpose for anyone, any other business. I think my view on it is it's more around the knowledge bank that you have from the processes or from the testing. As long as that is kept in-house and as long as that is in order, it doesn't matter whether you're outsourcing or insourcing. And obviously there are exceptions to that rule. But I would say, take Automated Creative, for instance. They share amazing blueprints for what then works from an ad for us. So if we then go and run that in face care or we run that in body, we have the same results. So we're constantly driving a consistent improvement in our knowledge and in our results. So I kind of would swerve it away from it being an insourcing versus outsourcing and more around, as long as you're owning the data and capitalizing on that, then that's the important bit.
Okay, great. And then you covered this a bit, but back to that initial conversation you had with your German counterpart asking for tests, and it was a tricky conversation. This often requires extra budget, it requires extra resource, and people in this room may be sort of wary of approaching budget holders to get the budget to do this sort of testing. So what's your advice for how they can get around these natural objections, how they can get buy-in from their teams, and especially from the board, I guess?
I think probably starting small and really highlighting the wins that you have early. So like anyone in this room would probably be able to get access to run small social tests or to run small tests on the website. Even if you came back and said 3 a year, I would use that as an opportunity to then say, let's prove those 3 a year, let's nail that, let's do 6 a year, 12 a year next year, and kind of build on that. I think I'm in a fairly lucky position that I was able to kind of pull the budget on it, conscious that there's lots of people who won't. But I think if you do start small and you do focus on that, then you can kind of build and spread that knowledge.
Okay, and another question I had, just because it sort of was such a subject here to all day today, and it is in every sort of event, it's personalisation. Personalisation was key to what you're talking about today.
Yeah.
So where do you stand in it? And there's this, at the moment, we keep seeing reports that CMOs are sort of pulling back from personalisation or the importance of it, even though maybe 3 years ago it was the silver bullet for brands. So where do you stand on personalisation? How important is it, and what are the sort of potential roadblocks as we go into the new sort of environment?
So, I mean, for me, personalization is massively important, but it can't jeopardize scale. So for someone like Nivea, we're a mass brand, we're in 50% of households. We rely on growing penetration to grow a brand, so you never have to take your mind off that. There's no way that I'm going to be able to target single people on that. But by building our CRM database and having very targeted segments on that, we can get to a near enough level of personalization that feels personal to somebody, but is based more on their need states in the moment. So I don't like, that for me is probably the more important part of it, to get to a level of personalization that drives the scale that you need as a brand.
Perfect. Well, Adam, thank you so much. Amazing presentation. Very useful.
Cheers,
Good to see you.